good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Hi, I'm Monica Whitfield, and I'm here with the Equipping Brief the Nations edition. This is our very first edition and issue of the series, and our focus today is going to be on the United States of America. Um, I just want to talk about the United States. We're starting with the United States because even Americans need guidance on how to pray for our nation. As we walk through the 7 lenses that we talked about in the introductory episode, I do want to remind everybody that this is about informed prayer and it is not political commentary. We're setting the foundation for how we'll approach all nations as we form these briefs for the future. So, just another reminder of what we're looking to do. And so the equipping brief, it exists to specify and prioritize clarity over urgency. So we're backing away from the breaking news and reactive headlines, and we're shifting from emotional reactions to informed intercession. Prayer shouldn't be driven by the latest crisis or the trending topics. We want to have a more informed prayer strategy. And we know based on our research that I presented in the introductory episode that people want to pray and they feel the urgency to pray when they see issues, but they don't know what to pray. The statement that we used was that people resist ambiguity. They don't resist prayer. And so we're introducing a framework called informed intercession, where we ground prayers in knowledge rather than in emotion or reacting to breaking news stories. And the goal is to build endurance and allow people to pray longer, harder, and stronger by understanding the facts. And we do this through 7 lenses, which we are preparing to walk through right now. So our target nation for this week is the United States of America. And why are we starting with the United States of America? Actually, I intended to start with another nation, and I was brought back to the United States. Even though I'm an American, how can we skip the United States? Many people in America don't know how to pray for America. And the act and the role that America plays in so many other international issues is very important to pray for this nation. So I felt that to skip this nation or not to prioritize it would be negligent because this is a nation that needs prayer. And as I mentioned, a lot of people don't know how to pray in an informed manner. And so let's talk about the United States of America for a moment. So United States, it is a central actor. The United States is a global power. And what happens here in the United States impacts the entire world. We are looking at the United States. 3 areas of influence that the United States play is in international security, our economic systems, and our democratic norms. Impact not only what happens within this nation, but it impacts the world as a whole. The United States was founded on the ideals of liberty and self-governance. These are the United States' stated values. But there's also a contradiction. This nation has carried a lot of unresolved historical contradictions from the beginning of its existence. And these contradictions, they determine the ideals and the practices that are even in shape in this nation today. So I do want to reiterate, this is not about political parties. This is not a partisan issue. This isn't about politics. We are understanding what needs prayer, um, and forming prayer around those topics. So, our first lens that we look at is the historical roots. Um, and I have here the foundational contradiction. And so, the nation, it was founded on a contradiction. It declared um, liberty and equality while practicing inequality. And the practice of these contradictions has actually resulted in exclusion and exploitation in many respects. So, some of the key contradictions within the United States is we have liberty. We're founded with liberty, but we practice slavery. And so the United States was founded in 1776 on the Declaration of Independence, which proclaimed that all men are created equal. But while the United States proclaimed that all men were created equal, or are created equal, it maintained the institution of slavery, which existed from 1619 to 1865. And this created a primary contradiction between the nation's ideals and its lived reality. Um, this practice established racial hierarchies and patterns of economic exploitation that existed well beyond the abolition of slavery. Another key contradiction is the expansion versus displacement. So, as the nation was expanding and taking more land, um, it was done through the systematic displacement, um, cultural suppression, and broken treaties experienced by those who are identified as indigenous people. And so while the nation grew in territory and power, um, this growth relied on excluding and removing the nation's and the land's original inhabitants, which were the indigenous peoples. Another key contradiction of the United States face is democracy versus exclusion. And despite being founded on principles of self governance, women were systematically excluded from political participation and voting rights until the passage of the 19th Amendment in the 1920s. This exclusion represented a significant gap in the application of the nation's democratic principles and led to ongoing struggles for social and economic equality. You also have a contradiction in the labor needs versus cultural discrimination. And so throughout American history, immigration patterns have generated recurring contradiction in which we have a nation which relied on immigrant groups for labors while while simultaneously subjecting them to discrimination and barriers to cultural integration. And the last area of concentrated wealth, uh, I'm sorry, the last contradiction that we'll focus on is concentrated wealth and equality, which is versus equality. And so while the United States projects ideals of opportunity, its economic, political, and social power structures are often designed to concentrate wealth and influence among specific groups. So we've determined who gets to participate in wealth and influence. And this design has been responsible for persistent inequality among class, racial, and geographic lines that remains unresolved. So these issues continue to persist within our nation today. And these historical patterns um, have been responsible for the establishment of deep seated divisions and hierarchies that continue to influence American society and results in historical injustices that have not yet been fully acknowledged or addressed through formal reconciliation. And so we can't pray. We realize that we can't pray for a nation without acknowledging what needs to be healed. And that moves us into our second viewpoint, our second lens, which is leadership and governance. And we're looking at a system that is under strain. And the United States governance structure is under strain due to the erosion of shared civic norms, declining public confidence, and deep political divisions, which impact and almost hinder collaboration. So the system is designed to be three co-equal branches of government: the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government. Um, However, what we're seeing is that there is a deep strain within each of these areas of government. And we'll start with the executive branch. And so the executive branch of government is we have three particular issues that we're looking at that we can summarize. There may be more, but we're going to focus on three at this point in time. And it's governing with deep domestic division, and it's doing so with an environment with some severe polarization. So it's severely polarized. It's either you're one thing or you're another. There's very limited middle ground. And this severe polarization has and division within the executive branch has led to a variety of responses from the international government and the international um, continents. There's also policy uncertainty. So there's a strong reliance on executive orders and sudden policy shifts that has created instability in key areas such as trade, immigration, and regulatory enforcement. There's a ideological shifts within the leadership. The leadership within federal agencies and even cabinet appointments reflect substantial ideological departures from previous administrations, and it contributes to discontinuity of governance within the country. On the legislative branch, we see a partisan gridlock. Again, I said there's uh, very divided. We're looking at a very divided um, culture. And so Congress is operating with narrow partisan margins, which has limited its ability to achieve bipartisan legislation. This persistent gridlock results in stalled major issues. So there are major issues that need to be addressed, reflecting critical policy areas, and these can include fiscal policy, climate change, healthcare, immigration reform. Some of these issues have spanned across multiple administrations, but the persistent gridlock and the partisanship issue has caused these issues not to be addressed. There is also overall legislative productivity of Congress has dropped below historical averages. The productivity of this branch of government has pretty much declined to historical lows. Now, looking at the judicial branch, The judicial branch has experienced over the past few years some very major compositional shifts. And this has resulted in changes to decisions regarding executive power, environmental regulation, voting rights, and even abortion. Major issues that have been on America's agenda for quite a while. And so, because of this, there has been an erosion of trust in this branch of government. Public perception has worsened, and increasingly, people are saying that the courts have become politicized, and there is a limited amount of trust in this branch of government. Additionally, because of how the government is being administered, there are many lawsuits within lower courts that have been rising to the coming up to the what we would call the Supreme Court, and those lower courts are struggling with resource constraints, and they have significant case backlogs, which means when people bring issues to the courts, they're having to wait a longer time to have things decided. What's not on the slide are two additional areas of governance. And one that I want to talk about is at the state and the local area. There are conflicts between the federal government and the state. And these conflicts have intensified over issues such as healthcare, educational policy, voting procedures, and immigration enforcement. Um, Many states are looking at policies that differ significantly from federal directives, and this they're having to manage through a patchwork, what is called a patchwork of governance. Um, and many local governments and local leaders are finding it difficult to address community needs as they navigate between limited resources and increasing partisan issues that they had not had to address in prior administrations before the current one. Another There are two additional power centers that impact leadership and governance within this nation, and one is a monetary and corporate pressure. And so we have the federal, what we just call it the Federal Reserve, which manages monetary um, issues, and they are under increasing pressure um, to manage monetary policies in line with partisan issues, or even corporate influence is attempting to take over the monetary governance. And there's also a concern in regards to the media, in which media organizations, and this includes social media platforms, have begun to exert significant influence over public discourse and content moderation decisions which affect political speech. Um, and so areas that were very middle of the ground and bipartisan are beginning to govern in ways that are much more partisan and much more divisive. Overall, these challenges indicate a decline in common civics values and the ability to work together to solve problems. Let's look at the international involvement. And there are three areas of international involvement. We look at our allies, we look at institutions, and we look at our adversaries. And within our allies, we're seeing the relationships are many is strained in some respects. Trust is strained with traditional allies, which question whether the United States is a reliable long-term security partner. Um, and this is indicated through NATO allies and European partners who have expressed concern over consistency in policy across different administrations. And they question the ability of the United States to maintain security commitments. There's also an issue that has come up in regards to intelligence sharing partnerships. They are strained due to political unpredictability, whereas they found in the past that some of the international policies have kind of remained consistent across administrations, but now um, our international relationships with allies are sometimes differ from administration to administration. And this also impacts global institutions. And when I speak of global institutions, I'm talking about U.S. engagement with major international bodies, and this could be the United Nations, this could be the World Health Organization, the World Trade Organization. These our engagement with these world organizations has fluctuated depending on the administration and power. And this volatility in our relationship structure, it also extends to international climate agreements where United States participation remains uncertain. And this has an impact on global development and humanitarian aid budgets, who find that without United States participation and funding, these institutions face weakening, um, and it makes major cooperation on shared global challenges much more difficult. When we look at our adversaries, adversarial nations such as China and Russia, they look to exploit some of the declining perceived value and cooperation of the United States. They utilize these opportunities to actually amplify their own agendas, um, and to influence and to challenge America influence within international institutions. Many of these are adversaries are actually authoritarian regimes, and they utilize some of the challenges within America to justify their own governance structures. And as United States influence fluctuates on an international level, these adversaries actually look to fill some of the power vacuums that have existed where people are moving away from the United States. Some of our external issues. So we don't see in the United States where there are a lot of sanctions imposed upon us. We will see that as we look at other nations, but we do find that the United States, even though they don't face sanctions, they do face pressure from other nations. And we look at this pressure from three perspectives: economic, global, economic, diplomatic, and in the one around the border. Um, and so one of our, when we look at economic, we look at three areas: trade and currency, technological rivalry, and investment in talent. And what we are seeing from the research is that the United States has imposed tariffs most recently. But the United States, as a result of imposing those tariffs, has also found itself in a situation in which the United States is subject to retaliatory tariffs from trading partners. And we're also beginning to see situations in which the global market, which used to be managed and used to be valued based on the United States dollar, is moving away from valuing global energy on the United States dollar into other currencies. United States faces intense competition, particularly from China, in the area of technology, for dominance of manufacturing and technology. And this technological rivalry extends to military technology, space exploration. The United States is facing increased rivalry in technology, while at the same time facing um, a decrease in demand of United States talent. When during periods we see across historical time frames, during periods of political uncertainty, international investment patterns start to move away from the United States access. And this also includes the desire for United States talent. And so we're in danger of a brain drain, what is called a brain drain, as it relates to international talent. Um, and this is also somehow somewhat impacted by some of our immigration policies. From a diplomatic standpoint, there is an increasing critique of domestic policy. The United States is, the international community is beginning to increasingly criticize United States domestic policies as it relates to criminal justice, immigration, and healthcare access. And this has a tendency to lead to diplomatic isolation in certain international forums. Um, Allies in the United States, we're facing some strain, as we discussed prior, in regards to those relationships. Um, and so they are pressuring the United States to be consistent in its foreign policy commitments, and human rights organizations are critiquing the United States because of how their administration of human rights within their own country. And again, we see our adversaries, particular China, Russia, they are utilizing some of the breaches in the United States to exploit their own, to advance their own issues, and to uh, drive the challenging of the United States and international institutions. And another, our last area of pressure that we're looking at as it relates to external pressure is on the border. And there's a little bit of, as our bordering countries, particularly Central America and the Caribbean, um, begin to have their internal issues, that begins to drive people to want to migrate to the United States to get away from what's going on in those countries. And the United States begins to see large numbers of people seeking asylum within the United States. However, the United States has, they have shifted their immigration policies and border enforcement policies, and that is facing a lot of international criticism. Those policies are. How does this impact the citizens? We've discussed quite a bit that has been going on, and what is the impact of this on the citizens of the United States? And a lot of times, with everything that is going on, the human cost is very often the greatest cost. And so we look at the impact on citizens from four lenses: relational, mental health, economic, institutional. And what we're seeing is, from a relational standpoint, we've talked about political division, which has begun to infiltrate personal lives, and it's caused families to have a lot of strain. A lot of families avoid political conversations in order to preserve relationships. Some families are completely estranged because of these issues. And it's also these relational and these partisan issues. We're also seeing them in areas of community. So areas that were pretty much deemed nonpartisan, traditional gathering places such as churches, neighborhood associations, civics groups, they're losing their ability to be able to serve in a manner that is not political or not partisan. Um, and these are community areas. So this is where people pretty much gather for relationships. There's a little bit of a strain even in those areas. And we also see it extending into the workplace where professional environments are being facing increased pressure to in regards to social and political issues. We talked about the community organizations that are struggling to be neutral, inclusive spaces. Of course, with all of this happening, there is a mental health impact. And what we generally see is increased anxiety. Mental health professionals are reporting rising levels of anxiety, depression, and stress as it relates to political and social division, isolation. People, political identity has replaced true community belonging. And as that's happened, we're seeing higher levels of loneliness and social isolation amongst our youth. There are concerns of heightened anxiety regarding their own prospects and the future of the nation. There is we have a news cycle that never ends, and constant exposure to news that is very partisan and divisive, and even social media content that is very divisive has contributed to widespread emotional exhaustion. From an economic standpoint, we are seeing that households are facing increased financial anxiety in regards to their ability to plan for retirement and even having just job security. um, the economy is experiencing overall growth, but citizens are facing higher costs. They're facing wage stagnation and increasing healthcare costs, and those are of great concern. There is also economic inequality that is it differs between urban and rural areas, and even coastal and interior areas. So there's economic disparity depending on which geographic where you lie geographically within the nation. And lastly, we'll look at our institutions. Um, and when we're talking about our institutions, we're talking about education, government, media, religious organizations. And we did discuss earlier the erosion of trust and confidence in these foundational institutions. It's declined significantly. um, there is a fragmentation as it relates to information. People no longer have common shared sources of information. So there's a differing set of facts depending on what your the lens that you're looking at things from, and even people may um, differ from the facts that are being presented here, because in some respect facts aren't facts. It's based on um, that has even become partisan. History has become partisan, but we know that there is truth, um, and so that information fragmentation makes it very difficult to have trust in any things. And even like places like schools used to be um, very center line, but schools have become places, they've been the source of conflicts, they've been the target of conflict. especially as it relates to curriculum content that talks about history, race, and gender. Teachers are having to struggle with navigating politically charged classrooms, and higher education is facing challenges in regards to enrollment and public trust. So, how does this impact us going forward? If we continue on this path, um, in the United States, if the United States continues on this current path of internal division and inconsistent leadership, the implications are far reaching. Again, we're talking about a nation, um, that what happens within the United States has worldwide implications. Um, we look at a threat to the global stability and even the viability of our government, the dominance, democratic governance worldwide. And so we are a democratic model of a nation. And if the United States continues on a more authoritarian path, the democratic model of government loses credibility, and authoritarian form of government gains validation. So, if the United States stands as an advocate in the past for democratic governments, but without strong United States advocacy and support, we're likely to see an impact on democratic government advancement in other nations. We're also looking at security vacuums and geopolitical shifts. Um, this can be done through weakened alliances. So, security alliances such as NATO may weaken as United States decreases commitment and leadership in this regard. This can lead to an escalation of other regional conflicts. Um, we're looking at our adversaries, those nations that America challenged in the past, continuing to expand because now the United States is not filling these spaces, and so these nations will choose to fill these spaces. We have a chance of nuclear proliferation and expansion growing, taking forth, and so whereas there was trying to pull back nuclear weapons, we can see that expand without the if the United States does not shift paths. Global instability. Um, there's economic uncertainty as a global economy takes its lead from the United States trade and monetary policies. And so we're looking at the United States role, taking a, a, a downgrade um, as the global reserve currency and facing challenges in that regard. We're looking at weakened institutions such as the United Nations or the World Health Organizations. Those organizations can weaken without United States participation and funding, and this can continue to grow amongst other nations. This impact has the potential to stall global initiatives, and things that were gaining momentum can lose momentum. So we actually can find ourselves going backwards um, internationally on areas that we have found advancement. And looking at this from a humanitarian and social consequences lens, we can see reduced aid, so humanitarian aid, international development, those areas where the United States fill huge spaces will see contributions decline. And this leaves vulnerable populations worldwide with reduced protection and support. The United States can lose its moral authority and human rights advocacy, and it makes it difficult to address global humanitarian crises as they arise. And then the United States can face where their citizens are more socially isolated, increased mental health strains, and the continued erosion of trust in foundational institutions. The United States is a central actor on the world stage, and its domestic challenges faces consequences far beyond its borders. And continued instability, it impacts not only the American society, but it creates dangerous gaps in global leadership that threaten international security and cooperation. So we've talked about a lot, um, and we addressed all of this to get to how do we pray, what do we pray about, and I've given you a lot of historical data. So I'm going to summarize how we pray for the United States. We're going to approach prayer from the position of humility, wisdom, and restoration. And we're looking at a prayer not from the point of addressing the symptoms, what is happening currently, how people are feeling, but we're going to look to address the root causes of those symptoms. Um, I picked one scripture that kind of summarizes everything that we've discussed, and that's Micah 6:8. Um, and where it says that the Lord, oh Lord, what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with God? And this is what restoration looks like. When we start there and we look at um, everything through the lens of do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with God, we can address 6 specific areas of prayer for the United States. And those are humility and repentance across leadership, institutions, and communities, wisdom for governance that prioritizes the common good over self interest, healing of historical wounds and relational divisions, renewal of trust in institutions meant to serve and protect, unity that allows people to come together while honoring truth, stewardship of national influence for global stability. Those are the 6 areas based on the history that we've looked at, the 7 lenses that we've looked at, that we can use to pray about the United States. There is an accompanying guide, the prayer brief, the United States, which also lists this information and lists the history and everything. And I really invite you to use these resources as a starting point for prayer. Again, this is not a comprehensive uh, prayer strategy. It's a starting point, not the final word. But use this information to find an area to pray about consistently. And maybe it's today I'm going to pray about the history. Today I'm going to pray about leadership. Today I'm going to pray about unity. However you feel comfortable, use it to pray and to pray consistently. I really hope this was helpful to you guys. I really invite you to use everything that is provided. You can share it. You can use it in your churches and organizations, prayer groups. This is meant to be a guide to help everyone, a resource to help everyone. And with that said, I'm going to end. Thank you for tuning in to the Equipping Brief Nations Edition. Today we focused on the United States, and I'm going to say the Equipping Brief. Nations is led by the Equipping Project, which is a project of Monica Whitfield. This guide is not a substitute for guidance from spiritual leaders or experts. It is a tool to help everyday people begin praying with understanding. You can follow the Equipping Project on Substack. You can follow it through connecting with Monica Whitfield, or you can go to monicawhitfield.com or Monica Whitfield on Substack. I'm looking forward to connecting with everyone and hearing your feedback on this episode. Have a great day.